1 month before the Pokemon World Championships, I was in a bit of a bind. Worlds was coming up quickly, but I didn't know which Pokemon I wanted to bring. I'd found a bunch of Pokemon that I thought were good, but I didn't know if they had what it takes to win the World Championships. One of these Pokemon was Sneasler. I already thought that I wanted to use Rillaboom on my Worlds team, and Rillaboom's Grassy Surge ability can combo nicely with the Grassy Seed item, which gives a Pokemon a defense boost if grassy terrain is up. This also activates Sneasler's Unburden ability, basically doubling its speed and making it tankier. I was messing around in the team builder when my friend Marcus, who was visiting, let me know that he'd signed me up for a tournament under the name WolfeyVGC. We needed more practice since we'd spent a ton of our Worlds preparation in the theory stage, and he thought that by signing me up, it would force me to actually put together a full team and get some experience. That left me with about an hour to round out my team. I added Regieleki, who I thought could be strong with its speed and damage, Arcanine for support, Scarf, Urshifu Rapid Strike, and Farigiraf. The tournament would have 6 rounds, and I'd need to win 4 of them to make it past the first stage. My first opponent forfeited upon seeing the Sneasler on my team, which means this tournament effectively starts for me in round 2. My opponent has a Trick Room team and opens up with Fake Out and Trick Room as I set up a Swords Dance with the Sneasler. I use Arcanine to let the Sneasler take a hit and KO Iron Hands with my boosted Close Combat, but Ursaluna hits the field. I use Rillaboom and Arcanine to stall out the last few turns of Trick Room, and I get the Sneasler back in safely right as the Trick Room ends. Even though Sneasler is low HP, I predict Ursaluna to Protect, and Terrastalize Sneasler to Flying to let me KO Cresselia with Wood Hammer and Acrobatics. Up 4 against 2, I easily clean up Game 1. Even though I won Game 1, I didn't love that I immediately gave up most of the Sneasler's HP, so for Game 2, I decided to switch up my leads. Unfortunately, my opponent leads with Fluttermane this time, which is a lot more threatening. I get a burn on Iron Hands and then try to take out Fluttermane by switching in Rillaboom and going for Terra Flying Acrobatics, but my opponent switches into Cresselia. Unfortunately for them, this means I can KO Cresselia next turn with a double attack. And though I lose the Sneasler, their Iron Hands is burnt. Heatran comes in and I predicted to Terrastalize to Grass, launching 2 U-turns into it and dropping it to low HP, though in exchange I have to give up my Arcanine. Heatran is low enough that a double up takes it out, making the battle a 2 against 2. Fluttermane survives my Scarf Surging Strikes, but Rillaboom finishes it off, and I win the 1v1 because of that burn on Iron Hands. Round 3 features a standard offensive team, which means Regieleki can shine. My opponent leads off with Chien-Pao and Urshifu, but my Regieleki outspeeds even Scarf Urshifu. I predict them to switch, as they go into Rillaboom, and Thunderbolt and Flare Blitz KO it as Chien-Pao protects. They go into Fluttermane and Terrastalize to Fairy, but that won't save them from Helping Hand Thunderbolt. Urshifu comes in and goes out, as it drops to Thunderbolt, and Chien-Pao Sucker Punch fails as Arcanine goes for a Will-O-Wisp. I win without losing a Pokemon. That changes with Game 2. This time, my opponent opens up with Dragonite, and Terra Normal Extreme Speed KOs Arcanine right away. I take out Dragonite in the same turn with Helping Hand Thunderbolt, and Regieleki loses half of its health to Sacred Sword. Sneasler and Urshifu are sent out, but I switch to Rillaboom and use Acrobatics to KO Urshifu, though Rillaboom almost faints to Icicle Crash. Unfortunately for my opponent, their Choice Specs Fluttermane gets KO'd by Terra Flying Acrobatics, and there's no way for them to win a 1 against 3. Round 4 is against a terrifying team, with Dondozo as well as Tornadus, Chi-Yu, and Fluttermane. Game 1 opens up with Tornadus setting Tailwind, allowing Fluttermane to Moonblast Regieleki, but it narrowly survives. Unfortunately, Aleki faints to the Life Orb recoil, and Tornadus survives because it Terrastalized. I take out Tornadus, but not before they set up Sunny Day, and now Chi-Yu gets to hit the field for free. The combination of Chi-Yu and Focus Sash Fluttermane in the sun are way too much, and I lose Game 1. So for Game 2, I switch up my strategy. This time I lead with Farigiraf, who threatens to set Trick Room up in front of this Tailwind Tornadus. They go for a Sunny Day to survive Surging Strikes, but I predict this and U-turn into Arcanine, breaking the Focus Sash and tanking the Dazzling Gleam. I take out Tornadus, but it's actually slower than my Arcanine, and Bleak Wind Storm KOs Farigiraf as Flare Blitz Recoil finishes off Arcanine. I'm now down 2 against 3, and I have Choice Scarf Urshifu in Trick Room. This looks super doomed, but I see a way out. I use Knockoff on my own Urshifu, removing the Choice Scarf. This lets my Urshifu move before Flutter Mane in Trick Room, and I use that to win the game, which means it's all down to game 3. I go with Alecki and Rillaboom as my lead this time, as I figure my opponent's not going to let me set up Trick Room easily. But to my surprise, they go with Tatsugiri and Tornadus lead. Tornadus terastallizes, letting it survive the Thunderbolt, and I'm forced to protect Alecki and trade most of Rillaboom's health for a KO on Tatsugiri, which lets Chi-Yu hit the field. But by terastallizing to fire, I'm able to survive the Terra Fire Heat Wave, though my poor Alecki faints. I bring in Farigiraf and use Fake Out to set Trick Room up, but now I'm down to my last 2 Pokemon. I take out Chi-Yu with a double up, and Sash Flutter Mane hits the field. Unfortunately, Tornadus lives Psychic on 1%, and Bleakwind Storm hits both and KOs Arcanine. Bowling VGC has lost their first set. I need to win one of my next 2 sets to make top cut, and winning both of them could get me a bye. My next opponent has some lesser used Pokemon like Dragapult and Hisuian Arcanine, as well as the always terrifying Goldengo. But I know what went wrong last set. I didn't bring the Sneasler. The battle opens with Alecki and Arcanine against Arcanine and Urshifu. I use Volt Switch and Flare Blitz into Urshifu as it switches to Amoonguss, dropping it to low HP. I see an opportunity, so I protect the Sneasler and bring in Alecki, blocking a Will-O-Wisp. Now I can Thunderbolt Amoonguss, who switches to Goldengo and loses 70% of its health, as Close Combat takes out Arcanine. Amoonguss comes back in, but I switch to Rillaboom and use Acrobatics to take it out, while Goldengo protects. I use the Sneasler to take out Rillaboom and finish off Goldengo with Regieleki. Game 2, my opponent leads off with Dragapult and Chien-Pao, 2 Pokemon they didn't bring to game 1. I try and go for Protect and Will-O-Wisp, but Outrage hits the Arcanine and takes it out. But that just means I get a free switch into the Sneasler. I Terastallize to Ice and take out Dragapult, tanking Icicle Crash as well. And Close Combat drops Chien-Pao to its Focus Sash. Arcanine comes in and protects to let my opponent bring in Amoonguss as I double attack the Protect. But another double attack next turn finishes off Arcanine as Amoonguss Terastallizes to Water. Chien-Pao protects, Rillaboom KOs the now Water-type Amoonguss, and I win the game and make top cut. But if I win this last round, I might get a bye through the first round of top cut. Unfortunately, it's against the exact same team that I already lost to, the Dondozo and Chi-Yu team. My opponent brings Glimmora, a Pokemon that never came to the last set, and blocks my Wood Hammer with Protect as they poison my Rillaboom. I Volt Switch into Flutter Mane, but I lose half of Farigiraf and Rillaboom's health in the process, though I at least KO Flutter. Dondozo comes in and I protect and Wood Hammer the Glimmora, doing tons of damage but giving them the Toxic Spikes. I KO Glimmora, but Dondozo takes out Farigiraf, which means this game is a 2 against 2. I have the Sneasler this time, but Alecki still gets poisoned. Sneasler and Terra Ice Alecki try their best to bring down Dondozo, but it survives their attacks and one-hit KOs the Sneasler. But it faints to the recoil damage. It all comes down to whether Tatsugiri survives a Thunderbolt. I go for it, and it lives. I lose game 1. Since my opponent didn't bring Tornadus to game 1, I predict them to do the same for game 2. I open up with Alecki and Urshifu, and I predict Glimmora to Terastallize to Water, KOing it in one shot with Thunderbolt. They're forced to combine Dondozo, but because they've already Terastallized, the combination of Thunderbolt and Surging Strikes takes it out. I win the game in 4 turns. Once again, against this team, it'll all come down to game 3. This time, I go back to Regieleki Rillaboom, as I like it the most against Tornadus leads. But my opponent starts the game with both Dondozo and Tatsugiri, making it clear what their strategy is from the get-go. I use Arcanine and Rillaboom in combination with Volt Switch to lower Dondozo's attack over and over and to force it to Terastallize. Then, I burn it. And then, stuck with the burned, intimidated Pokemon that can't switch, I bring in the Sneasler. I set up 2 Swords Dances, then take out both Dondozo and Tatsugiri in the same turn. Flutter Mane and Tornadus are sent out, but Sneasler tanks a Shadow Ball and KOs Tornadus as Rillaboom drops Flutter Mane to Focus Sash. Rillaboom KOs Flutter Mane the next turn and I win the set. Which means I not only made top cut, but I got to skip the round of 32. And if I want to win the tournament, I'll have to win the next 4 sets in a row without losing a single one. Top 16 is against a player with a team that has Tailwind, Trick Room, and general bulky Pokemon. Game 1 opens up with a mistake from me as I try to fake out Heatran as my opponent brings in Farigiraf, though I do get good damage on it with Volt Switch. Turn 2 looks kind of bleak as Heatran Terastallizes to Grass and receives a helping hand. I'd probably have to let something faint. I predicted the Terra Grass and I U-turned it with both Urshifu and Rillaboom, but it won't KO. Unless I crit. Heatran goes down and suddenly this match is flipped on its head. Alecki takes out Gyarados as they set up Trick Room, but their last Pokemon is Fluttermane, who gets KO'd by Rillaboom. Sneasler takes out Farigiraf and I win the game. I definitely got bailed out by that crit, so I need to be a lot more careful in game 2. I lead off with Alecki and Urshifu against Tornadus and Heatran. Volt Switch brings Tornadus down to Sash as it sets up a Tailwind, and Heatran misses a Heat Wave on my Sneasler. Close Combat does a lot to Heatran, but now both my Pokemon are slower than both of theirs. I sacrifice Urshifu to bring in Rillaboom, activating Unburden. And I figure there's no way this Tornadus is going to stay in when I could easily just KO it with Fake Out. So I Terrastallize Sneasler and KO Heatran as Fluttermane switches in and eats a Wood Hammer, KOing it. Their last Pokemon is Urshifu Dark, who gets one shot by the Sneasler as Rillaboom finishes off Tornadus, and I advance to the semi-final. This team has a bunch of bulky Pokemon like Amoonguss, Landorus, and Heatran, but it also has fast and strong attackers. I lead off with Rillaboom and Alecki against Fluttermane and Tornadus. And I get some free damage on the switched in Landorus as the other Pokemon protect. I don't want to lose Alecki here, so I Terrastallize to Ice, but they U-turn Rillaboom and set Tailwind. They bring in Urshifu as I Volt Switch Tornadus, knocking it out and bringing out Sneasler, as Rillaboom U-turns into Urshifu. I double into Landorus with Acrobatics and Aqua Jet, but it Terrastallizes to Flying and just barely survives, and a double up takes out the Sneasler. I bring in Rillaboom and predict Landorus to switch out, using Fake Out into the Urshifu and getting my Alecki back in, but there's still one turn of Tailwind left. I switch back out and sacrifice Rillaboom, which lets me get Alecki next to Urshifu finally. Thunderbolt KOs Urshifu and Surging Strikes takes out Fluttermane, and with only Landorus left, I win the game. Game 2 opens with Arcanine and Alecki staring down Landorus and Tornadus. I switch to Rillaboom as they Tailwind and U-turn into Fluttermane, as Volt Switch takes out Tornadus and lets me get Arcanine back in. They send out Urshifu, but I call that as a bluff and I ignore it, using Will-O-Wisp as it switches to Landorus and Wood Hammer into Fluttermane. Unfortunately, Terra Fairy Moonblast plus the recoil is too much, and Rillaboom faints. Fortunately, that means the Sneasler gets to come in. They switch Fluttermane into Urshifu, but I block their U-turn with Protect. And even though Tailwind is up, Sneasler is still faster than Urshifu. I Terrastallize to Flying and take out Urshifu, and Arcanine finishes off the switched in Fluttermane. With only Burnt Landorus left, I win, which means I'm in the semi-finals, but I need to beat a Dondozo team if I want to make finals. This one doesn't have Tornadus or Glamora. It instead has Chien-Pao and Dragonite. I open up with Alecki and Arcanine, and I call their turn 1 Protect, burning Dragonite before it can move. I KO Chien-Pao with Volt Switch Extreme Speed as Dragonite Outrage hits Arcanine. My opponent goes into Dondozo, but now, because Outrage connected, they can't switch into Tatsugiri. Dondozo protects, fearing a Will-O-Wisp, but I go for Helping Hand Close Combat instead. Outrage takes out Arcanine, but it did its job. Tatsugiri comes in, but all those stat boosts and a Terra Grass don't save Dondozo. With only Burnt Dragonite and a Tatsugiri who gets KO'd by a double up, I win the game. Game 2 starts with Dragonite and Chi-Yu. They Terrastallize Dragonite to normal and call my Protect by double attacking Arcanine with Psychic and Extreme Speed, taking it out before it can move. I go into Rillaboom, but it's a bait. I switch to Farigiraf immediately, and I Thunderbolt the Fluttermane switch, doing over 70%, as Armor Tail stops Extreme Speed. Chi-Yu comes back in, but I Volt Switch the Fluttermane, knocking it out and bringing in Rillaboom as I set up Trick Room. I use Fake Out and Terra Blast into their Chi-Yu, as their Ice Spinner removes the terrain but activates Farigiraf's Rocky Helmet, breaking Chien-Pao's Focus Sash. I double into Chi-Yu to KO it, and then do the same to Chien-Pao. Dragonite's Outrage takes out Farigiraf, but it activates Rocky Helmet. The combination of Wood Hammer and Thunderbolt plus the Rocky Helmet chip are too much, and Dragonite goes down, earning me a spot in the finals. This is against another Dragonite and Chien-Pao team, though this one has underplayed mons like Gastrodon and Hisuian Arcanine. Game 1 opens up with us both leading Arcanine and a special sweeper. My Alecki, their Fluttermane. I go for a Protect with Alecki, but my opponent calls it, doubling my Arcanine and taking it out after Flare Blitz takes most of Fluttermane's health. But losing Arcanine just means the Sneasler gets to come in for free. My opponent switches both of their Pokemon out, nullifying my Volt Switch, but I get a Swords Dance up. Arcanine comes back in and narrowly survives the Volt Switch Terra Flying Acrobatics combo, but Gastrodon gets a yawn onto the Sneasler. I reposition and take out Arcanine on a switch, as Gastrodon terastallizes to Fairy. After some switching around, I'm able to trade Cresselia for Regieleki, putting us into a 2 against 2 situation. Rillaboom takes out Fluttermane and my opponent forfeits. One more win and I'll have won the tournament. And the leads are the same for game 2. This time I go for Helping Hand and Thunderbolt and KO Fluttermane right away. Rock Slide even misses Arcanine, meaning this turn went as well as possible. I go for another Helping Hand Thunderbolt, but their Arcanine survives and I lose a Lecky and most of Arcanine's health. The Sneasler comes in and takes out Arcanine, but this time Chien-Pao is the final Pokemon. I can win this as long as I get Chien-Pao low enough, so I Terastallize Rillaboom and go for an attack, but I flinch from the Icicle Crash. I see one more chance to win. Helping Hand Woodhammer with Chien-Pao's Sword of Ruin will probably KO Gastrodon, but they protect. And now my Rillaboom's health is too low. I call the Sucker Punch and sacrifice Arcanine to switch Rillaboom out, and I get a burn on Chien-Pao. Then again call the Sucker Punch and take out Chien-Pao with close combat while Fake Out keeps me safe. But this Gastrodon has Citrus Berry, so a double attack won't KO it. I go for Knockoff and Swords Dance, hoping they attack Rillaboom, but Earth Power KOs the Sneasler. Ironically, Rillaboom loses the 1v1 against Gastrodon. This tournament will be decided in this final game. For the third time, we each lead with the exact same Pokemon. This time, however, I protect and switch to Rillaboom. The Gastrodon switch-in is obvious, and I want to keep Arcanine healthy to deal with that Chien-Pao later. Now I can go for a Fake Out into Gastrodon and Thunderbolt into Arcanine, which does over half of their health, as I take a Rock Slide, which doesn't do too much. But since Gastrodon just protected, it's in big danger. I use Volt Switch into Gastrodon, and it terastallizes to Fairy. I do just under half and bring in the Sneasler, as Rillaboom survives a Flare Blitz and KOs Gastrodon with Woodhammer. Now they're down a Terra, their Arcanine is low HP, and the Sneasler is in position. They reposition safely, getting Chien-Pao next to Fluttermane as I get Sneasler next to Arcanine. But I see what they're going for. They want to bring an Arcanine to let Fluttermane survive a hit. I Terastallize to Flying and use Helping Hand to offset the incoming Intimidate, and Acrobatics one-hit KOs Fluttermane. Sneasler takes out Arcanine and my opponent forfeits. And just like that, I've won the tournament. Now, if you watch the World Championships, you know that I didn't end up using the Sneasler, but this tournament was still important nonetheless. In winning, I felt like I understood something about the format, and it gave me more confidence in my ideas moving forward. And at the end of the day, I learned something. In life, you're either the Sneasler or you get sneezled. Goodbye.